That's my camera right there. Okay.
Good evening and welcome to Chasing the Facts. I'm Sam Chase, your host. And with us this evening is Mike Raisbeck, who is the current chair of Chelmsford's Planning Board. And we have an election coming up on April 4th, I believe it is. And there is, I hope I say this correctly, you'll correct me if I'm wrong, there is one seat up for election and one alternate seat up for election.
Right.
That's correct. So Mike is the incumbent. He is seeking re-election to the planning board, and Mike is completing his 4th term. And prior to his first time as an elected full-time planning board member, he had 2 years as an alternate. So you've had 14 years on this board. So that now begs the question, why, after 14 years, are you running for re-election?
Yes, I was a young man when I started this.
Yes, you were.
Well, a couple of reasons. But first of all, I do enjoy it. It has its tough moments, and this year has had a few. Mm-hmm. But in particular, I'm far and away the longest serving on it right now, and I have a fair bit of institutional knowledge. And I don't want to take that institutional knowledge away from the board. So I think there's some value in staying on for another term. And so that's my plan.
Well, that makes perfect sense. And I believe also, as far as your professional background is concerned, you're also an attorney. And you're an electrical engineer?
Electrical engineer by training, really more software now.
Okay.
Doing medical software tests.
So certainly the legal background is germane to what you're doing on the planning board as well.
That it is. Mm-hmm. That it is. It's very helpful. So
are you the only attorney on the board?
I'm the only attorney right now.
Okay.
I'm trying to think of what everybody else is. We've got, Ms. Arroway is an engineer. Mike Walsh is a fairly important person in the construction industry. Mm-hmm. I mean, he's working with constructing medical facilities, things like that. And, you know, there's a variety.
There's a variety, yes. And you have a medical doctor.
I guess we do, don't we? We have Deirdre.
So you're all set. If anybody gets sick at a meeting, you're in good shape. I don't think that's a bad idea.
No.
So anyway, well, that's good. So you are seeking what will be a 5th term.
That's right.
If you're reelected. So maybe briefly you can give us an idea of all of your board service. How do you feel that the town has benefited from your service? And certainly that's 14 years plus. So you
Well, you know, the planning board has 2 functions. They're really somewhat separate. One is the planning function, and you see that with the master plan, mm-hmm. comes out every 10 years or so. And the other is a regulatory function where you hear particular requests, requests for subdivisions, for special permits, things of that nature. They're somewhat separate pieces. And so we serve the town, both ways. But the thing that people see the most often is the regulatory aspect and the planning board meetings we have twice a month. And
relative to specific projects that are brought before.
Yeah, relative to specific projects. I mean, the most recent big projects have been River Neck Road, mm-hmm. and before that, the West Campus project. Going forward, that's pretty big. And then lots of small ones. We don't do variances. That's the ZBA. Right. But we do the special permits that come up fairly frequently. Also, we manage the subdivision law, and we do a curious thing, the A&R, approval not required, mm-hmm. when somebody wants to split up a piece of land, and they come to us to say, do I need to come to you? And we say, no, you really don't.
And then you approve it anyway.
And then we approve it anyway. It's called an A&R.
I think the first time I saw that, that was a head scratcher.
Yeah, it is a head scratcher.
I don't remember whether you were chair, maybe it was somebody else, but I remember the first time I saw it, the chair explained that.
Yeah.
well, you're here, you don't need to be here, but we're going to approve it anyway.
Yeah, we're going to give you approval that you don't need to be
I
here.
said, maybe does this fall into the category of what is wrong with this picture? I don't know, you know.
A little bit,
Yeah,
a little bit.
right.
Your reaction is what everybody's
Yeah,
reaction
right,
is.
exactly.
Yeah.
So, well, you brought up two interesting points. So you're talking about two different functions of
Yes.
the planning board, major functions. So I would take the first one more in the planning
Yes,
aspect of it.
exactly.
So would that include zoning? And initiating zoning changes, would that fall into that?
It might include initiating zoning changes. It certainly includes managing requested zoning changes, whether we've made them or other parties have made them. The proposals for any kind of zoning change come before the planning board. We hold a public hearing on it. We gather information. We make recommendations. Often we make adjustments. We've been doing that just recently for some things that will potentially help out the ZBA. All of the zoning functions all of the zoning requests or changes come before us in one form or another.
Now, how consistent, if the planning board is looking at making changes, and I know in the past we've had, I would say the overlays would fall into that category almost more than anything, because
Yes.
you've already got existing zoning in place for a particular area, but maybe there's an economic need or something in the town that would suggest that if that zoning could be tweaked a little bit,
Yeah.
which is really the purpose of now,
overlays.
correct me if I'm wrong, I'm saying things that I think I know are true, is the primary purpose of an overlay. So your underlying zoning stays the same, but the overlay actually is an addition to.
It's an addition to, it's optional,
Okay.
but it puts the planning board in the position of being able to negotiate with a proponent for something.
Okay.
Now, the proponent can come in if he's got a plan that falls completely under existing zoning. Many of these situations, we don't even have to touch them. But if there's an overlay that allows them to do a little more that they couldn't ordinarily do with the underlying zoning, in exchange for that possibility, we get some say in the matter. We get to negotiate, it can be anything. It could be landscaping, it could be setbacks, it could be architecture even, all kinds of things.
That's a very interesting thing, Mike, because I don't think people generally understand that. So if I heard you correctly, okay, you have a situation where you've got, obviously the zoning is in place, whatever it is, a proponent or developer comes in, wants to do something with the land that he owns that is generally consistent with the zoning, but you have an overlay in place that's going to allow him some flexibility and some options. So what I think I heard you just say is that's almost like a negotiating thing. You don't have to grant the waivers or the exceptions or whatever.
We don't.
So the proponent comes in and says, well, I want to do X, Y, and Z. And you say, okay, what are you going to do for us? Is that a fair statement?
That's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
And sometimes the scope that it gives the proponent is pretty wide. I mean, we have situations in industrial commercial where you could potentially have housing under overlays in certain parts. That's really quite different than the underlying zoning. But it puts us in a position to negotiate projects like that, mixed-use projects. We have some accommodation in the overlays for amenities in industrial areas. But you don't necessarily have to apply an overlay to an industrial
Well,
area.
I'm thinking of the 129 corridor here.
Right,
and
that's the one that comes to everybody's mind.
that was quite a battle in town meeting, as I recall. And I have to say that my wife and I went into Boston Sunday to see, we saw Hamilton, okay?
Oh.
Wonderful show. Now, she'd seen it. I had never seen it. And so we're coming home. It's about dinner time. And she said, she said, the Press Cafe just opened. And I said, yeah. I said, we haven't been. Let's go. And So we went, and by the way, it's very nice. They did a very nice job with that. The services, when the food was very good, very extensive menu. But while we're sitting there, you know, I guess I've been in this government business too long. I'm sitting there and I said to my wife, you know, this wouldn't be possible without the zoning.
Right.
That,
and in particular, without the overlay.
The overlay zoning that, you know, the planning board initiated that, and then the town meeting obviously had to approve it. And she said, well, what do you mean? And I said, well, one of the problems in trying to get this area developed commercially, you know, more tenants to come in and put their businesses here, is the underlying zoning did not allow for restaurants.
Yeah.
Okay, and this kind of thing. And I said, it's the amenities factor, and that's what the town was trying to address 4 or 5 years ago.
It absolutely was, and
So-
that's precisely why we did it.
So we're sitting there having our dinner, and we're actually talking about this, and so my wife says, well, maybe now that this is here, and then maybe some others will come, other types of things, that this will help draw, you know, other commercial enterprises into I said, well, that's the idea.
Yeah,
Now,
exactly.
whether it happens or not, who knows?
Yeah, who knows? And we're in a very interesting market now.
Right. But that's something that the planning board, it would seem to me, would take the lead on, okay, promoting.
And in fact, we did.
Something like
that
that.
was a lot of the work on the overlays that apply there. A lot of that work was done by the planning board and by the development staff.
Now, how much do you, as a planning board member, how much do you pay attention to the town's master plan? Does that figure into the calculus
Well,
at all?
in fact, we sort of preside over it. The 2010 master plan, Jim Lane was the head of that one.
Yes, I remember.
Did a very good job. That was quite extensive. The most recent 10-year version was really a bit more of a continuation of the 2010. But yes, we...
Well, that speaks to the how well the previous one was done.
Well, we
I would
think
say.
so, although I'm beginning to see signs in the market that may cause us at some point to try to reinterpret some of that stuff or figure out different paths. I mean, getting commercial space filled, and in particularly in industrial space in the IA area, has been quite a challenge.
What is your perception in town relative to the townspeople in general, if I can lump everybody together, in terms of development, commercial and/or residential? I mean,
It's all over the map, and one of the toughest things that I'm dealing with now on that board is figuring out a path through all of this in light of the bylaws on one side, which tell us what is zoned for where, and things that are being said by individuals or neighborhoods in the context of projects that come before us, which are sometimes rather different.
well, we just had
We just had
an example, a
Yeah, we
proposal, the Riverneck
right, the
situation.
Riverneck thing. Now that's been withdrawn, as I would have recommended the proponents do. There was a mixed view of that on the planning board, but the neighborhood was very much against it, and made a lot of noise in that direction. Problem was that the town zoned that area industrial back in the 60s. I was still in junior high when that happened. So we get stuck with the question, what is the will of the people of Chelmsford? Because the planning board is not there to do the will of the neighbors. We listen to the neighbors, and they have a lot of good things to say. But we're there to do the will of the town of Chelmsford. And that's largely embodied in the bylaws. So here's an area that's been industrial for 60 years, at least. And somebody's coming in to try to do something in there that's industrial. Now, we still have, because it's such a big project, we have a lot of control, and we can say no based on certain criteria. But the contrast between what our zoning said and what the neighbors, who were clearly the people the most affected by it, say, was stark. You probably saw some of those hearings.
I did. I think I probably watched most of them.
Yeah, and there were a lot of upset people, and I think in many cases the upset was directed at the planning board, even though the planning board was simply trying to apply the bylaws.
And so in that particular case, yes, the neighbors were very vocal, but there were also folks from other parts of the town who supported the activity. So the developer, Davis, withdrew the project.
Yes. Without prejudice.
Without prejudice, that's right. Okay, so that means that at some point, they could bring back the project in some other form? Is that what that
Well,
means?
they could technically bring it back in exactly the same form, but I think they've obviously figured out that that's not going to fly.
That's not going to fly, right.
So they have to go back to the drawing board and think about what it is they're really going to do. And if we're fortunate, they will come back with something that is much more agreeable to the people up in East Chelmsford, that we can work with and tweak a little bit and pass. That's the positive view. There's also a negative side to this, which is they can always subdivide the land. And in fact, they have already started the process to do that. Split it up into 5 or 6 chunks, put something on each of the 5 or 6 chunks.
How big is the parcel?
The parcel is about 10.5 acres.
Okay.
Plus, apparently, they bought or were in the process of acquiring some more on the other side of Riverneck over, behind the old Apollo building.
Right, right.
So I don't know how much in total they have and whether that deal went through or not.
Certainly, it's enough to be subdivided. Yeah.
Absolutely enough to be subdivided. Now, suppose they do. Well, how would we regulate what goes on to those parcels? Well, the only way that we could regulate them would be if there was some applicable special permit. Now, the special permit that usually catches the big projects is called a major business complex. If it's over 20,000 square feet, it's going to have to get a special permit based on major business complex. But if you take a piece of property and split it up, and on each one of those you put 19,998 square feet, and there's nothing else that needs a variance, the planning board can do essentially nothing. And that's nothing about traffic, nothing about any of those things. So,
that's a good point.
And that worries me.
That's a good point. So let's just say, for the sake of argument, they subdivide. Now you got 5 projects.
Five or 6 projects.
And it doesn't change the underlying zoning. It's still IA.
Yeah.
So they have that, and you've got the overlay, and so they've still got that latitude. So that could make the situation potentially more problematic.
Yes.
For everybody.
For everybody.
Because you don't know what they.
No, and they probably wouldn't have as much control over one on each individual lot. I mean, I can think of nightmare scenarios. A pile driver testing company, or so I could go thunk, thunk, thunk all day long. Well, fortunately, we have some noise bylaws to cover that.
We probably aren't going to do any more asphalt plants. If I had,
we're not going to do any more asphalt. No, that actually is off the.
Yeah.
That's off the list now.
So, but we do have the recent zoning changes that were passed by town meeting, and I don't know if the Attorney General has approved them yet. That do prohibit the type of project that Davis was bringing in. Anything over 75,000 square feet?
It's a little bit tricky. It was an interesting bylaw change, and its intent, possibly a very good intent, was to prohibit what you would call distribution centers.
Right.
Well, what's a distribution center? The definition isn't as clear as you might think. And what is the difference between a place that brings in huge crates of widgets and puts them into smaller boxes and send them back out again, or a place that brings in huge amounts of plastic that it puts into widget machines, generates the widget, and ships out boxes and boxes of widgets. You know, are those two different things? Well, one of them sounds like manufacturing, one of them sounds like distribution, and are they really that different? So there's some utility in that bylaw change, but I'm not convinced that we could completely count on it to keep some kinds of undesirable activities out. And another question that comes up is, well, if you don't want certain kinds of industrial activities, what kind of industrial activities do you want? Well, what most people would like to have would be either an office building.
Assuming people want some kind of development.
That's the right. Yeah. Well, if they want no development, they've got a bigger problem, because if you say we have an industrial area but there isn't a single thing you can put in there that will allow, sooner or later that's going to wind up in somebody's courtroom.
Yes.
You can't do that.
Yep.
If you're going to zone it for industrial, you have to have some plausible set of things that could go there. Well, what most people will like, what I would like, it would be an office building or a small R&D facility. It's not noisy. It's mostly
like what was there before.
Well, I worked at
you
Mercury
worked at
for a
Mercury,
while.
right?
I remember exactly what it was like.
And they were, as I recall, they were pretty good neighbors.
They were very good neighbors, and
so that would be the ideal. But going back to what you said at the start of the show, the market has changed.
Right. Have you driven? Well, not just down 129. Go up 128. Look over to your right as you're driving north, and look at all the small office buildings with for rent and for sale signs on them. COVID came in. Everybody worked at home for a couple of years. They figured out that they could work at home for a large number of things. And I don't know, maybe only 80% came back to work in office buildings, or even 90%. I mean, a 10% drop in usage of such things pretty much stalls your market for 5 or 10 years. So, okay, if we're not going to get that, and we don't want transport, that's the other thing. Right? Fortunately or unfortunately, Chelmsford's right at the crossroads of 495 and Route 3. It's an obvious place to put transport facilities where things would change, maybe from one truck to another, they would get packaged, whatever it might be. If we don't want that, and we have a sewer moratorium, which is one of our biggest problems right now. We're not going to put housing in it.
That's a huge impediment to.
And there's certain kinds of manufacturing also that we couldn't put in there without the water. So what the heck can the owners that land do with it?
Just a little bit of a side, and I don't want to take away from your electioneering, but the sewer moratorium is really kind of an interesting situation because, as you know, because you've been in town probably almost as long as I have.
Yeah, since before we had sewers.
Yeah, before we had sewers. And there's always been the contingent in town that's just anti-development. I built my house, I don't want anyone else to build a house, and we don't want any commercial or industrial activity. And, I look on Facebook and I see people who post and they say, well, Chelmsford is losing its rural charm. And I say, well, I don't think these folks understand that we are the 17th largest municipality in the state. I think the rural charm ship probably sailed a long time ago. But I mean, and I'm not mocking these people. Yeah. I mean, I understand why they feel the way they feel and so forth. But the development factor is something that many people don't want at all. Yeah. And then you have the sewer moratorium that came in. And so I thought, when that happened, I thought, well, now all these people that don't want the development are going to be very happy. Yeah. Because if we cannot connect to the municipal sewer, that really stalls a lot of that development,
Yep.
because to put in an on-site treatment plant is very, very
No, that's prohibitive
Okay.
for all but the very largest of projects.
Exactly right. So people ought to be happy. But what happened was, a lot of these same people who complained about the development were now screaming about the fact that we have a sewer moratorium. And I'm saying, fellas, you should be happy about the sewer moratorium.
Your wish was granted.
Your wish was granted, because now we can't do any development. So, there seems to be a little bit of a disconnect. I don't know if I'm reading that right or not.
No, I think you're reading it
Yeah.
absolutely right. And from the perspective of the planning board, it's a very tough thing to deal with.
It is. It is.
And I don't know that that's going to get resolved anytime
Now, in the
soon.
terms of the project we were just talking about, now, that was not an issue for them, because I think people have to remember that that site was already operative before.
Right, and
the
in fact,
proposed
yeah.
use probably would not have added any to the
No,
capacity.
I don't believe it would have. And it was larger from at least from
A footprint standpoint,
A footprint
right.
standpoint. But it wasn't. I mean, people imagine that it's 2 or 3 times larger. No, it was about 25%. I think it was 190,000 square feet to 247,000 square feet or something like that. It was bigger, but by no means hugely so.
It seemed to me that the biggest concern that the residents had was the traffic impact.
It was,
Yeah.
but then a proposal came in to route the traffic a different way, and they still didn't like it. And I can understand. I mean, I don't want tractor trailers going up and down
High Street.
any of those high streets or wherever you happen to live.
Yeah.
On the other hand, and this gets back to the problem of subdividing. With subdivision, if they put a bunch of, let's say, 19,998 square foot buildings on there, and they have a whole string of tractor trailers coming in and out of there all day long, going up and down River Neck Road, there's absolutely nothing we can do to stop them. You cannot simply put a truck exclusion on a road. The state won't let you do it. The basic rule is there has to be a good and reasonable way to get there. I mean, if you're going to have an exclusion, there has to be another good and reasonable way to get there. Well, for this particular site, there's only one way to get there. That's
Yeah,
River Neck
it's access is difficult,
Yeah.
and River Neck is a tough road.
It is. It's not well suited to truck traffic at all. And I've been up and down it. Of course, I was up and down it many times when I worked at Merck.
Given the width and the curvy nature, I would even argue it's not all that well suited to automobile traffic.
No, it isn't. I completely agree with you.
I think it's a dangerous road.
Well, certainly
Yeah.
dangerous on a bicycle.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty road in many spots.
It is,
But,
it is.
But, I can just see coming up there, trudging up a hill on my bike and have a truck come around the corner and
No.
wind up as a hood ornament.
That's, if everyone in the audience knows what a hood ornament is, we're dating ourselves.
Yeah,
here,
I'm afraid
okay?
we
We're
are.
dating ourselves. So I think we've discussed that. Is there any other, we've got about a minute to go, and I want to leave a few seconds at the end for you to ask for the vote. Is there any other thing you would like to get out there quickly that you want voters to be aware of?
It's just that the planning board does a number of complex things, and there are very few 100% hard and fast rules for what the planning board can do. So you have to rely on the judgment of people on that planning board. That's what I hope I can offer. There may be, certainly people disagree with me often enough, but if they can at least trust in my reasoning and judgment on things, then I think I have a great deal to offer them. I hope so.
14 years experience.
14 years experience, and I keep thinking, boy, I must have made every possible mistake, and then I wake up the next day and find a new mistake that I hadn't discovered yet.
I know. My father used to say, the older we get, the dumber we get. You've got 20 seconds, look into the camera and ask for the vote.
Well, thank you, and I would very much appreciate your vote in the upcoming election. I'm Mike Raisbeck, current chairman of the planning board, and hope to be a member of the planning board for the next 3 years.
And don't forget to vote on April 4th. Thank you very much, Mike, and good luck.
Thank you.
That's a wrap. Okay.